excited for. I let Donna give me a little. She's the contracts queen. Thank you for being here today. We're going to have a really productive meeting here with Simon about all the new forms change. He's going to go over the redlining of each of the platforms for you to ask questions. So write down some of those. He's going to each of the because this is a great opportunity to share. We learn from others, right?
That's right.
I love that. One more little slide here, even though there we go. Even though she's not yet, call me and let me know that she's. Okay.
Hallie, can you hear me?
Yeah, we're going to be working on Zoom audio right away. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay?
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Can you hear me a little bit better now?
Much better.
Okay, great. It's because this is day one of us trying out a really fun microphone, so you guys on Zoom can hear a little bit better.
Amazing.
Anyway, so before I give this back to Simon, so she's running a little bit late, so I know we're going to be able to see her today, but I just wanted to kick off this meeting with a little bit of thank you and gratitude. As many of you guys know, our dear, wonderful Cindy Swenson is really breaching into the world of full-time real estate. So she's stepping back on her MCA role, and she's going to be being a practicing realtor full-time. So we are so very excited for her. It was really fun actually pulling all these pictures, some of these memories from Los Al. I know I see Julie on there. There's Robin, a good one of Drakey that was from here. Which was pretty funny. I think that was from St. Patrick's Day a couple years ago. But anyways, all of us have such fond memories with her, and we appreciate her while she sticks around, and she's not going away forever. She's just going to be here in a different capacity. So I just want, when you guys go to see her, we are passing around a card. We did get her a nice gift and some flowers. We're going to give her a bit later when she gets here. But if you guys could sign the card, we'd love it and appreciate it. Summer's passing it around, just to give a big thank you to her and her service. So I know she's not here, but this is recorded right now. So let's give her a big thank you and round of applause, everyone. All right. So enough about me. Let's hear Simon, a bit of housekeeping rules. We will be having lunch delivered. Thank you to the wonderful Brandy Zamora, who's going to be bringing that for us. It should be here about 11:45. It's going to be a fun little breakfast extravaganza. So you guys will get lots of fun stuff over there. But as soon as it gets delivered, we will break shortly for a little bit. That way you guys can grab some food. We'll hear a couple words from Brandy. But beyond that, please use every opportunity you can during this session to just politely excuse yourself to use the restroom, as we most likely won't stop except for a small break to a little bit of eat. So you guys, thank you for being here. Simon, here you go.
Awesome. Good morning. Before we get started, let's get everyone to stand up real quick. And the reason I'm having you all stand, because if you're not aware, it's 3 hours long. Okay, this is not inspirational. This is not motivational. This is very dry material. So I want you to stretch a little bit, and I promise you, I'm going to do my very best. We may throw some scenarios in here because right now the contracts are going to be completely revamped. Okay, you may take a seat now. Thank you. So as Hallie was saying, fun things are about to happen. So write this down, folks. June 25th. June 25th is when the launch of all of these new forms, okay? With everything that's going on with NAR, the settlement, CAR, Board of Realtors and real estate professionals throughout the nation are revamping and changing in how we do business, okay? One of the biggest changes is the listing agreement, okay? So if you haven't already, on the wall, you see the forms update. If you haven't yet, I encourage you, form summary And all of the redlining forms are here. Okay? Summary and all of the forms. Did I do that?
Nope, you can go to the next one.
Okay.
Have the, oh, which one did you just go?
This one on top.
That's okay.
So,
There you go.
Okay.
These ones going across.
okay. All right, there you go. Form updates, form release summary, which is a copy of this this form straight out of the California Association of Realtors. And then the form updates. These are all of your redlining. I definitely encourage all of you to please start preparing, download the forms on your computer, and really understand the scope of what we're all facing, right? Now, everything is
August 17th is when it's really, but June 25th, we're going to be
The-
expected to follow it.
that is correct. All of the forms through zip forms will be updated with all of the forms, the listing agreement, the buyer representation agreements, and all of the
Yeah,
new
now it's
forms.
saying We're doing this June 25th, not August 17th.
That is correct. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
But it's mandatory by August 17th.
That is correct. Yes, yes. All of the forms will be available June 25th. Okay, June 25th. So I'll give you a few minutes to download the forms and then put it on your computer, save it on the folder. There's a lot of content, there's a lot of information, and I want you to be in alignment. Now, everything is subject to change, right? Whatever I'm talking about now may change June 25th. Okay. And as most of you are aware, there's always 2 updates every year with CAR. There's one in June and then one in December. Okay. What we have going on today is all of the forms that are impacted coming June 25th. Okay. All right. Here it is. Here it is. So I really want to dive deep into the listing agreement because I think it's one of the most misunderstood forms right now because of all the language and all of the commission. Before I get started, do you have any questions right now that I might be able to address? Say buyer representation agreements. You're uncertain what's going on. A buyer agent's going to be eliminated. No questions whatsoever. Yes. Yes. Thank you for asking. So there is some new fields on CRMLS. Okay. Those fields is concessions. Okay. So we were under the understanding that the compensation to pay a cooperating broker was going to be eliminated. Well, it is. Okay. But CRMLS added a provision into the listing agreement that the seller has the option to pay concessions. What are concessions? Closing cost, buyer buy downs, and also commissions. On the MLS, it's going to give you a percentage flat or who's going to be paying what. Okay. That's on currently on the CRMLS. Okay. The listing agreement, a lot of information. Does it look similar to the purchase agreement? Very much so. Now, the listing agreement is grids, but it also has interpretation, which is totally different than what we currently have in our listing agreement, right? Because currently the listing agreement shows what? Total commission, and then what we're paying a cooperating broker compensation, right? Well, that has been eliminated. Okay. The new form goes into, I see scribbles here. Pretty self-explanatory. It's an exclusive right to sell, right? So it's an exclusive listing agreement. Pretty self-explanatory. Where the biggest changes is the C section of the form, grid 1 through 7. Okay. The items in the paragraph are contractual terms of the agreement are referenced to the seller. And now the listing agreement is 7 pages long. The current listing agreement is 5 pages long. So they added more language and more documentations, okay? So 1, 2, and B are pretty self-explanatory. Beginning date and expiration date, right? Listing price, pretty self-explanatory. Property specific listing, right? What type of property do we currently have? Now, section C is where it becomes fun. Now, we all know that compensations are negotiable, right? And are not fixed by law, okay? There's a disclaimer that is currently and also with the new listing agreement that all commissions are not fixed, right? It's between what you and the seller negotiate, right? Most standard practice is what? What's standard commission for us? Correct. 5, 6%, okay? It's typically the standard. But in essence, it's between what the buyer, what the seller, and what you're willing to agree to is how the commissions work, okay? C1 of the listing agreement goes into very specifics. Compensation to seller, broker, only seller, the agreement. So full transparency, folks, is the information now when you're meeting with the seller is the understanding and how commissions are going to impact not just you, but also buyer agents, okay? So number 1 talks about a percentage or a flat fee. That's the amount that you negotiate between you and the seller of what that agreement is. It's not the total commission. It's just between you as the listing agent and the seller is willing to compensate you. Make sense? Okay. Section A2 goes into optional additional, and it says optional because the seller has the option to pay a buyer agent a commission or not. So it says optional additional compensation, if any, to seller broker to be offered to the buyer's broker. And it has a percentage or a flat fee. Okay. And this is where your skill sets need to come in and really show the value and the importance of why we need buyer agents. It's vital and crucial, right? Because the uncertainty that we have, our buyer agent's not going to be paid a commission if we cannot collect from the buyer, right? That's going in all of our heads, right? But if you show the value and the importance of why we need buyer agents, then the seller, full transparency, will know exactly what that entails. Section C3 goes additional compensation to the seller broker if buyer is unrepresented. Okay? Very specific. What does that mean? Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, say again. Mm-hmm.
They have a buyer, and C3 would be if we're now going to represent them as a dual agent.
Well, not necessarily. It says unrepresented. For example, you're hosting an open house, okay? Buyer comes in, and you ask the qualifying question, hey, are you working with an agent? No, I'm not. But I'm very interested in submitting an offer. The current scenario is that anytime we're talking real estate to any buyer, we must have some type of buyer representation agreement, right? That's the new norm, right? But can we force a buyer to sign any documents? The answer is no. So a buyer wants to submit an offer for the purpose of collecting additional commission, again, full transparency. We need to let the seller know, hey, if a buyer comes in, no representation whatsoever, you know, this is what the commission is going to look like, right? And that commission can be whatever you and the seller agree to. This is for a non-represented buyer, okay? Now, if you look at section C 4, okay, C4 goes into if same individual agent represents both the seller and the buyer, okay? What does that mean now? Now that's considered a dual agency. Yes.
So on represented buyer, what do I do as the listing agent for that? Am I involving my E&O? Am I involving the office? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm-
Yeah, so it's a very good question. You're still covered under the umbrella of our risk management and also our E&O, right? Once you go into contract with an individual, you still have an agency agreement and you have a purchase agreement, all right? If this goes sideways as a dual agent or an agent that is not signing a buyer representation agreement, you're still covered under the umbrella of the E&O insurance. Does that kind of answer your question?
this between the dual agent and representing somebody who's not-
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I wish I just had a mic here. So the question is, what is the difference between a non-represented client and a dual agency? Well, as it states, and I understand the conflicting situation, which is still subject to interpretation, in my opinion. The question is, what is the difference, right? If you have a buyer representation agreement or you don't. The non-representative, if it's an individual that is walking into your open house as an example, without an agent or some type of representation, okay? If they come in and they want to submit an offer, okay, based on that provision of C3, then that's the compensation that you are requesting commission from the seller. Now, C4 goes into the dual agency. What is considered dual agency? Dual agency can be one agent with representing both the buyer and the seller, but also two agents in the same office representing both the buyer and the seller, right? That's considered dual agency. Now, again, going back to full transparency, right? Now we have to put this as part of the line item of consideration when we're speaking with the seller, because if you leave that blank and you have a very sophisticated client, they're going to say, well, based on the listing agreement that you provided me and I executed, it says that a dual agency was left blank, so I'm not obligated to pay you a commission for the buyer side. Now that's where the buyer representation agreement that the buyer would be responsible to pay you a commission. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes.
Play it safe, we would want to make sure that we're having C2, 3, and 4 filled out every single time.
Yes. The follow-up to that is for full transparency to protect you. Any angle that can go is fill every position there. C1, C2, C3, C4. Okay, Richard.
Is it safe to say then the difference between the unrepresented and the agency buyer who sign the buyer's representation agreement with you or not? Is that really the main difference?
That is the main
Does
difference.
that mean that a buyer can submit an offer on your listing without being represented by a buyer's agent, whether it's you or someone else?
That is
They can go with zero.
correct. Yeah, yeah.
But I thought the rule change was now a buyer has to sign an agreement with the buyer.
That's a valid point. Because everyone is like, well, I thought when we were talking about real estate conversation that the buyer must sign a buyer representation agreement. And we're going to dive deep into that conversation because the buyer representation says, yeah. Now, the question is, how do we maneuver that position when the buyer agent has a buyer representation agreement and what the language stipulates and says, right? Now, it's all subject to change. And it's still uncertainty how we're going to maneuver this because again, it's not very clear. What's the difference between a non-representative client and a buyer who is represented with the buyer agreement, right? Yes, go ahead. That's correct. That's correct.
In order to have an agency agreement, there's buyer's representative form that you'll need to sign. And basically, it's non-committal. I'm non-exclusive, we make it just for this property agreement, and then you don't pay any commissions. But I don't understand about writing an offer for a buyer without an agency agreement.
Yeah. I'll answer that. You had a question? Stefan.
My interpretation is that it's non-represented buyers. It's exactly that would have associated with represented. So it distinguishes specifically represented buyer versus the non-represented.
Again, full transparency, the listing agreement gives you those categories. So it's going to be very interesting in how we navigate this particular scenario. Richard. Yeah.
Support the buyers.
Correct.
So isn't there just a provision that the buyer refuses to sign and we still represent them? Otherwise, the buyer will never.
Well, again, with everything going on, part of the segue of the settlement, right, is that moving forward, any conversations we have with the potential buyer, we must have something in writing, right? Which is the buyer representation agreement. So again, it's still too early in the process to know. As we're diving deep into this, we'll get a better understanding and angle in how we're going to maneuver these questions. Again, I'm only basing on what we currently have, right? If there's a lot of questions that hits CAR, they may remove this because of unclarity. What's the difference between representing a buyer and the seller and an unrepresented client? It's hard to say right now. Okay, I'm only illustrating what we have currently with the red line information. Okay, question, Cindy. No. Yeah. Say that again, Cindy. I'm sorry. Well, not these specific forms, because these are for Realtor members only, not necessarily for buyers. But buyers and sellers can open escrow without ever using an agent. You know that, right? They can have a napkin and say, here's the price, here's the terms, and here are the conditions, and let's open escrow. As long as there's mutual agreement between both parties, they don't need a real estate agent. We facilitate the processes because there's language in there that protects both consumers, right? The buyer and the agents as well. Okay, am I not?
Repeat the questions for me. Put
Okay.
them on there. So when someone asks a question in the crowd, please ask really loud. Everyone on Zoom wants to hear you too. Simon's going to work really hard to repeat the questions. Thank you, Zoom. I know it's frustrating, but we're going to get it all worked out.
Let me put it a little higher. Sorry. I love.
The volume on the thing real quick. Yeah.
Yeah, let's switch it.
Got mine off and use that volume. So the volume's going to be right there, but if you can repeat the questions, that would be wonderful.
Okay.
As people ask them. Let's try that instead. Thank you guys for your patience.
73 people on Zoom.
Yeah, we got a lot of people
Now
on
that's
Zoom.
fine. I got maybe 10 or 15 people on Zoom. It makes sense.
It's about the money.
I
This
know
is
most
awesome.
of those comments are about them not being able to hear the questions. They want to hear what you guys are asking. So just
Yeah.
thank you for your patience.
Thank you. I know there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of uncertainty. I wish I had the answer to all of it, folks. There's just so much content and so much of the unknown. Okay, I only have what's in front of me right now. And again, everything is all subject to change, folks, okay? Yes, sir.
So here's my question. Now I'm just trying to clarify for myself. With all this moving forward, if we want a buyer to work with us, then we need a buyer rep agreement. But it doesn't mean that a buyer needs someone to represent them in order to write an offer. So I mean, I don't want to get into a different form, and then the RPA is not going to have both sides of, you representing the buyer, you representing the seller. Is that going to be somewhat different then?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be different because remember, all of the forms are in alignment to specific language that talks about us as real estate professionals and why we're navigating the process for the buyer and the seller. So your question, Richard, is, can a buyer submit? I don't think that's going to be the case. It's one of those situations, and this is my personal opinion, is that if a buyer does not want to sign a buyer representation agreement, okay, does that mean that you don't have to work with that specific buyer? Yeah, that means you don't have to, but also means that they don't need to sign any document whatsoever, and you can still submit an offer on behalf as long as full transparency, you have something documented, something in writing that says that they're not willing to sign any buyer representation agreement. Then that protects us from the elements of everything that's going on. Hey, I tried to get that. They wanted to submit an offer, but they didn't want to be involved in any agreement with us, right? Now, the buyer representation agreement is a twofold too as well, because there's an exclusive and non-exclusive as well. Okay. So it's gonna be fun and interesting in how we navigate it. Stefan and then
I think Cindy had raised a great point in
Yeah.
that, if a buyer comes into the marketplace and we ask them to sign a buyer representation agreement and we ask them to pay us 2.5%, $25,000 on $1 million listing, they go, no, I don't want to do that. I think I might want to submit my own offer, right? And remember, this form is the listing agreement. So what we're saying to the seller, if an unrepresented buyer comes in, my job is going to change because I'm going to have to guide this unrepresented buyer through the transaction, which is harder. It requires more work than a represented buyer. And my fee for guarding that unrepresented buyer through the transaction is X.
And these are all great questions, folks. Trust me, these are great questions that I wish I had that magic wand that says, boom, here's the answer to that, right? But until we actually are in the trenches of all these different type of scenarios, we'll get a better understanding and an angle on how to approach it. Remember, let's go back during COVID times, right? Remember, if you were a real estate agent back in the early year of 2020, and then March came, and then we were considered non-essential. And then how did we scramble in working with our buyers or sellers, right? And then eventually we became essential, and then CAR provided us with critical forms that we needed to do when it comes to showing properties, right? One way or another, we were able to navigate that, right? Well, this is the same situation of the unknown. Right now, we're still in the very beginning of it. I don't have that crystal ball that says, okay, what does this mean? What does that mean? I can only interpret what the contract says. Because we can spend hours and hours dissecting what if this, what if that, right? Until we actually have a true scenario situation when you have a buyer and a seller in the chaos of this, or a listing appointment in the chaos of this, we'll have a better understanding. Okay. And full disclosure. I even reached out to Car Legal. And I spoke with a car attorney. And I asked specific questions to certain things of the new forms. And guess what they said? They were uncertain either. And these are the attorneys that are creating these forms for us. So if they don't know, what does that put us in a very volatile position too, right? I wish, again, I had that crystal ball that says, this is the answer to this. This is how you're going to navigate it. Until we get more closer to that timeline, we'll understand how to maneuver this. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes.
It's my understanding or my perception of this section, which is 2C. It's not about the buyer. It's about the seller and what they're willing to pay. of the transaction, whether it be only to the listing agent, a percentage,
That's right.
or if they're willing to go further and do what they used to do and pay for the commissions of the buyer's side as well.
That is correct. So if you look at section, well, I don't know if you can see it here, but C4, it says the total combined compensation shall be based on section C1 and C2. And that's where the amount, it's similar to what we currently have, right? The listing agreement has the total commission and then what the seller is willing to pay anyone that brings a ready, willing, and able buyer. Okay, that's what it means.
And they don't have to sign this. They don't have to agree to that.
Who doesn't? The seller?
The seller doesn't have to agree to pay the portion of the buyer. They only, if they.
That's
they
why
want,
they
can
broke
only
it
agree to
down
pay.
this way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the reason they broke it this way. So the seller will understand how the commission works. Okay. Doc,
I guess I'll make it quick announcement.
Yeah.
If anybody has a long question, if you could come to the front, and talk next to the speaker, the microphone, because people on Zoom can't hear the question, so they're wondering what the discussion is about.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to come up here. I'll try to do my very best to just answer the questions to everyone on Zoom. I apologize. It's just, there's rapid fire here, folks. I'm trying to, Cindy, yes. I'm represented buyer.
And they ask for our permission to be given to the buyer as concessions towards their closing costs or buy down or something like that.
So your question is, can buyers, commissions can be used as concessions to buyer? Non-represented.
For our commission to split, maybe some commission to you, but then I want all the rest of these funds that the seller is gonna give go to pay my closing costs. Can they split it?
So can I ask this question, Cindy? And the answer is yes, because that's currently what we can do, right? Can buyers give concessions towards buyers' closing costs, buy downs? For what?
They can get closing costs, but they can't get part of our commission.
Yes, they can. Yes, they can. But remember, it's a twofold question here, Cindy. The question is, who's paying the commission, right? And with all of the changes going on right now, there's uncertainty that the seller is going to compensate the buyer's agent a commission. Therefore, we have to rely on the buyer to pay us a commission, whatever that looks like, a percentage or a flat fee. This is the reason we have the buyer representation agreement as part of the segue of the responsibility to pay us a commission. With that being said, we want to navigate and ask the question, right? Because let's just say the commission is, and that's not going to be on the MLS anymore, what the commission is. How do you approach the conversation with the listing agent regarding compensation? You got to pick up the phone and ask, right? Is the seller paying a commission? Is the seller paying a commission? And the answer is what? Well, it depends, if the seller is or is not offering a commission, right? Because remember, you have a buyer representation agreement signed by the buyer, right? That says that the buyer is paying you a percentage, 2.5%, whatever that amount is, right? So under the obligation of the buyer representation agreement, it already sets the tone that the buyer, if you don't collect the commission, the buyer would be responsible to pay you a commission. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions? Okay, yes.
How were the seller says originally, no, we're not paying commission, and then they get an offer asking for the seller to pay commission?
Very good question. So the question here is, what if the commission, there's no commission from the seller, but part of the negotiations the buyer submits an offer with commission to be paid. Okay, the answer, yeah, they can ask for it. So commissions is now part of negotiations similar to request of repairs. Okay. Back in the day, remember the contract had where termite section 1, section 2 was already on the purchase agreement. So part of the segue of responsibility, who's going to pay for the termite, right? Who's going to pay for the report? Who's going to pay for the clearance, right? Well, that now has been eliminated from the purchase agreement. Now that's part of the negotiations of requests of repairs, right? Well, commissions is going to be similar to that, folks. That's the understanding, right? Because we're not going to know what the commission is, but can a buyer and the agent submit an offer on behalf? Because remember, the buyer is obligated to pay a commission if you have that in writing. We can ask the seller, even though the seller may not pay a commission, right? It's no difference than a for sale by owner. Okay, for sale by owners, what's the whole reason why sellers go physicals? Because they don't want to pay a commission, right? But does that mean we can ask if we have a qualified buyer that wants to buy a property from the seller? Absolutely. You can say, look, I have a qualified buyer that wants, if we can pay you top dollar for your house, are you willing to pay a commission? And that may change the trajectory of the conversation, right? That may change the pattern of the seller's position. You know what? They're willing to pay me what I'm asking. Therefore, I might just give a commission. It may not be 2.5%, but I'll give you something. Does that make sense? Yeah? Question? Yes.
Would that then, that contract of, if they agree through the RPA and a counter offer to pay that commission, would that supersede this then?
Yes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so that's all.
Everything is subject to be changed and modified. Whatever the seller says now can interpret something totally different when you're in negotiations. Okay. As long as both buyer and seller come to a mutual agreement, yes, anything can be changed, right? It's no difference than a listing agreement, right? You have a 90-day listing. Can you extend the listing if the seller allows the extension?
Yeah.
100%. Okay. Escrow, right? Buyer and seller are in escrow, but escrow is scheduled to close on the 15th of this month, but there was a delay and now we cannot close on the 15th. Can both mutually agree to extend that escrow? The answer is yes. The buyer and the seller can come to a negotiations regarding requests of repairs, right? And the buyer submits their request saying, hey, I want concessions, I want a price reduction, or I want you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, to fix this, right? And the seller can say yes, even though they say property sold as is, right? Which on the contract, it already says all properties are sold in as is condition, right? So everything is subject to change, folks. Okay, just because you have this in writing doesn't mean that will stay in ground to the terms, right? The seller can change their mind throughout the process. Let's just say you have a listing, right, and it's not getting any offers. You may have to do a modification, right? A price reduction, right? Or give some concession. Maybe the seller says, look, I don't want to pay a commission now, and you put it on the market and no one is really submitting any offers. And now you're having the conversation with the seller. Hey, your house is in good condition. We priced it well. You know, I'm not getting any hits on any buyers. Maybe that we may have to pay a commission, you know, and the seller may be okay to do so, folks, right? And now you have a modification of terms that allows you to pay a commission or the seller to pay a commission. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Again, going back, full transparency, I don't have the crystal ball. The crystal ball to say this is what's going to happen. Okay. Yes.
Just have to sign that. That will cover a lot of the bases for it. Well, make sure that, hey, you know what? They're on their own.
Even if we work, they choose selling.
Well, let me add to that. Let's say you're working with an investor, right? Are investors going to sign exclusive buyer representation agreement in your opinion? Why wouldn't they sign a buyer representation agreement exclusive with you? What? What?
They're gonna shop around and find, they're gonna work with everybody and anybody, they have no.
Because they're looking for opportunities with everyone, right? All agents are opportunities for investors, right? If you bring me a deal that makes sense to me, I'm going to work with you. Why in the heck would I just tie myself with one individual agent? Okay, because then I'm responsible as an investor, as an example, to pay a commission even though you did not find the property for me. Okay, it might have been someone else, or it might have been me finding the property directly, right? But because I have an exclusive agreement, I'm tied in paying you a commission. Okay. So I want to caution you all, right? The importance and how we navigate this moving forward, because it's been loose standard practice that we don't have buyers really sign buyer representation agreement. It hasn't been really the standard, and it hasn't been policy, right? If you want to use it, great. If you don't want to use it, great. But moving forward, based on everything that's happening, right? Any conversation when it comes to talking about real estate with a buyer, you must slap them with a buyer representation agreement. Because now it's who is going to pay a commission. Because if the seller's not going to pay a commission, are you going to represent if the buyer doesn't have the means to pay the commission? Especially for your VAs, right? Your FHAs, even some conventionals. They may have just enough to pay closing costs, down payment, just to get to their first home, right? What's your position there? What is that going to look like? You have to make that decision. Are you going to work with that buyer with the potential sometimes of getting very small, if anything? Right? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. But I believe, and this is just my true in doing this for 27 years, okay, is that agents are going to do right. And they really are going to showcase the reason why we need buyer agents. And crucial that we need to pay a commission. Now, I can't promise you it's going to happen with all listing agents, because sellers and agents, especially very sophisticated sellers, are going to say, well, why am I going to pay a buyer's agent when I'm not being represented by the buyer's agent, right? And now with all these new changes, right, in their mind, they're thinking, okay, I don't have to. So now I'm going to save. That's more net proceeds to me, right? But as a seller and as a listing agent, you know, you've got to really show the value and the importance. That makes sense. Yeah. All right, let's continue. Okay, because there's a lot more information.
Simon Douglas.
Yes.
There's a question on chat.
Okay, what's the
Here's a question from Judy. If I have the buyer rep agreement saying that the buyer will pay 2.5%,
yes,
and we write an offer and ask the seller to pay the 2.5%, but the seller says they will pay the 2%, then the buyer will still owe me 0.5%?
the answer is yes. So here's the question. If the buyer representation that you have is 2.5%, right, with the buyer, meaning the buyer is responsible to pay you 2.5%, and now you negotiate and the seller is willing to give you 2%, there's a discrepancy of 0.5%, right? Well, that response, and it's up to you. Yeah. That now is the responsibility of the buyer to come in with the difference in escrow to give you that additional 0.5%. Now it's optional too. Okay. This is you. You can say, oh, I need that 0.5%. Or you can say, look, it's a lot. I'm okay collecting 2% from the seller. I just want to get this deal through, right? It's your discretion in how you want to navigate that, right?
But on the flip side of that, if you put 2% on your buyer's representation, and the seller is willing to pay you 3%, you can only take 2%.
That is correct. That's a game changer. So thank you for sharing that, Richard. Yes, absolutely. If you have 2% from buyer's rep, right, saying, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, part of the process of me helping you navigate the process from beginning to end, negotiate, open escrow, make sure that we're doing our due diligence in communications with the agent, the escrow, the lender, and, you know, any type of inspections, right? That's part of my responsibility to you, right? This is what I'm charging is 2%. On the flip side, let's say that the listing agent and the seller are paying you 3%. There's a 1% amount, right? Now, currently, as we speak, that 1% typically would come to us, right? Typically. Well, with the new changes, unfortunately, that's not the case. The new changes means that that 1% will either go back to the seller as net proceeds to the seller, because the buyer is already paying you a percentage of 2%. Yes.
Okay, so we talked about this before, but so I'm a little bit confused. My first time buyer cannot afford to throw in another 2-3%. So they're willing to, you know, part with $1,000 max. Now the seller's offering 3%. Am I maxed out at $1,000?
That's what we think. On the buyer form, there's ways of indicating this is what you'll pay, and then it says on there, if the seller provides the buyer's agent with more than what's agreed, and then you mark off whether you keep it or whether it goes to them.
The question is, if you have a buyer representation agreement, it's a flat fee of $1,000 that the buyer is going to pay you, right? And then the seller is willing to give you 3%, right? Well, the situation here is it all is based on what the listing agreement entails, right? Because if we go back to the C section of the form, is the seller willing to pay us a commission, which is in this case 3%, right? Therefore, it offsets the buyer, right? His obligation, because that credits the $1,000 that the buyer is willing to pay. Full transparency, the listing agent can now ask for a copy of that buyer representation agreement to see what the commission is.
Can I
Okay.
see this?
You can ask. You can ask. Yeah, you can ask. But I don't know if it's mandatory for us to see the listing agreement.
Sorry, I don't want to go down this.
Rabbit hole.
Yeah. But I mean, technically, if you find out, if you call the listing agent, hey, what are you paying? 3%. Okay, hey, give me a second before I write an offer and modify the buyer's rep agreement. And as long as the buyer's okay.
That's one option.
That's the last I heard, Simon. They were saying you can't do that any more than you can't put a caveat in the bottom of it saying, I will accept whatever commission is offered. I don't know how they're going to police it, but that's what I asked for. Thank you.
Going back, and thank you, Penny. It all depends on how they police it, right? But I have to agree with Richard. You know, everything is subject to change and modify, right? Because I can tell you one thing now, but tomorrow it could be something totally different. And that's why we have modifications in terms, right? Listing price is an example, right? We have it listed for this price, but we're not getting any hits, no offers. We're not getting any hits on it. We have to do an adjustment, right? So I believe that that's going to be a way to modify these situations. Again, subject to change, Penny. I don't have the answer to that question as of yet. Until we see a lot of scenarios and you know, a lot of things happen, then we'll understand how to maneuver and navigate that.
Just write a buyer rep agreement for each offer you write. Every single time.
Pull it out of your what?
Cindy.
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
I'm not sure if I understand your question, and if you could speak up a little bit. You're saying when you submit the offer to the, I'm not sure if I understand that question, Cindy. Yeah. Yeah,
You guys, and we're talking about just the first few things of this. We're talking about dual agency and that, I mean, eventually you all, you're gonna kick in. Eventually you all, a double ending is gonna go away. This is just the start. But with that said, so many people think of us differently now, regardless of what's gone on. And so what you have to do, I've never seen this many people in this room. We need to not only get to know each other, because if you can't negotiate, you can't pick up the phone, because the biggest thing that we had at grievance and professional standards was people not answering the phone. So, well, Richard's already gone. But if you have a buyer that's gonna come in and great, and you're gonna call that seller, and you're gonna say to the seller how much you're gonna pay, and they don't answer your phone, that's what's gonna cause everybody saying lawsuit. We're such a litigious society. We have to be united in our whole group and how we do it. You've got to be able to talk. You've got to be able to talk to everybody and say, look, this is how we do it. There's all kinds of things that Simon is saying that's subject to change, subject to do. Use the people here to get answers to those questions. I mean, the thing that we're doing with, the buyer doing it already, I've met with buyers. I'm gonna pay you down 1,000. I'm gonna pay you 500. You'll still show me 50 properties. Then it comes up because I'm doing the ethics stuff. Is that ethical to say, sorry, I don't want to work with you? But we're gonna have to. Do not throw all of us under the bus, because there's gonna be other agents out there, you guys and gals, that are gonna try to work around this. We laughed about, having 8 different buyer broker agreements. Is that ethical, number one, and is that legal, number two? So just in that level, that's where I'm coming from. Seek out people, see what's there. We've got to work with each other, or I don't care how many rules Simon says he comes up with, it ain't happening.
thank you. If we're all in unison, right, we all win, right? And prime example, right, as we navigate this, we're all in the trenches of this. But I love the fact that you're all here. I mean, even on Zoom, we have over 50 people on Zoom, so that's amazing. Obviously, this is a very hot topic, right? Very hot topic. And how we maneuver, how we navigate it is vital and crucial. Now, I know there's plenty of classes CAR is providing on the listing agreement, the buyer representation agreement, and all of the new changes as well, right? So I encourage all of you, okay, not just take for what we have currently, but get other people's perspective to this as well. Because there may be something different that you pick up that says, okay, that makes sense, and how we can maneuver the buyer and the seller, right? Because the hot pressing topic right now is commissions. This is what everyone is like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen with buyer commissions, right? It's up in the air right now. Yes, Doug.
Allison Benwick has a question.
Yeah.
If you advertise 2% compensation and the buyer comes in and wants it, they say they are representing themselves. Does the seller have to give that?
Good question. If the buyer is not represented, I don't think I have an answer for that. That's a very good question.
Isn't there a section in that listing agreement that says for unrepresented buyers?
There is, but the question here is about compensation. I don't know if I have that question or answer to that. I don't know.
I'm sorry, the question was what? Can you
No.
compensate unrepresented?
If you advertise 2% compensation and the buyer comes in and wants it, they say they are representing themselves. Does the seller have to give that?
Does the seller have to pay the buyer a 2% commission?
No, she does that else.
It's the same money if you just deduct it from the.
But it all really depends too. Remember going,
Is the commission, is the buyer licensed? You can only get paid if you're licensed.
well, and remember the MLS is going to have a section where sellers can give concessions to the buyer. meaning towards down payment, closing costs and buy down as well. You know, but the question is unrepresented. That's the key. I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah, but it's also, you're, if you're the listing agent, right? I'm assuming that's Allison's question. If you're the listing agent and you're presenting the seller, and then buyer comes, just walks in and say, I want to present myself, and I want to, get those 2% commission or whatever. So first of all, everything is negotiable. So maybe that 2% can go towards concessions, closing costs, what have you. But here's the question once before is it to the best interest of the seller to work with someone who's not being represented completely? It's not like you're not dual agent. It's like someone that's going to present themselves. Like, how are they going to go about everything? Who's carrying the liability? So that's not a good question.
Yeah, isn't the bigger question, how would that buyer know? Because the compensations aren't being advertised. I thought that was a big part of what's happening.
And someone here mentioned it, but it's going to be, it will be on your personal websites. Go ahead.
It's already happening. If you look at the Oppenheimer group, they'll give you the property, the price, the square footage, and the compensation to the buyer's agent.
Yeah, the NAR exclusion is only on the MLS, but it doesn't say you cannot do it on your, Penny McCann's side banner of the car, or bench ads, or newspaper, or social media. It doesn't exclude that yet. We didn't say anything
But
yet.
you said A plus B is the total commission. So if they sign, the seller signed A plus B, why would it not go all to the seller agent?
MLS
Yeah, and that's-
is still going to syndicate out the same way it is now. Because most buyers, most consumers are looking at the public facing sites. They're not looking at our websites. Do we know whether the MLS is going to continue to syndicate out to Zillow, Realtor, et cetera?
Yes, but they are removing the compensation field. That's not going to show. At the back over there.
Couple things. So KWLS, if you guys have auto, go, use List Hub or whatever, check on it. If you're not using KWLS and entering your listing yourself, you should be doing it yourself. If you do it the way before you input it into the MLS, it feeds out, the syndication feeds out from there first. And it will put in whatever you want to most of the syndicated sites. So like, for instance, enter something in KWLS. I use listing keys for stuff. I pulled it into my KWLS. It has my own personal private information in there. On the MLS, in the private description, or in the public description, the syndicated description, you can actually probably put something like that in there, syndicated, but use KWLS and say it's not MLS related. Am I correct in saying that?
No.
Okay, so
Yes.
then if you're not using KWLS and you're relying on List Hub to upload it for you, you're making a mistake. I've been doing it and teaching to do this for a long time, and it gives you way more power over your syndication. Okay, so that's number one thing. The other thing is in regards to the buyer broker compensation. In the buyer broker agreement, it does say that you cannot receive anything in excess of, I think it's like D3, D1 or whatever, which is where you write in what the buyer's gonna pay you. But it doesn't say you can't change that. It says you can change that with modification of terms. So if you're, I like 123 Main Street, the buyer says, you find out what the compensation is, you're gonna write on that, all you have to do is use modification of terms to update your buyer broker stating what the commission is. The question I have on that is, can you say paid by the seller in the modification of terms when you find out that that is what's happening?
Are you asking that question? I believe you can. I believe you can. Yeah, I mean, I believe that you can, because everything can be modified, right? And the modification can be part of that segue is of compensation. So to answer your question, yes. Right.
One form change, and you can even state that it will be by the seller, because at that point you do know. This is really common in like land purchases and projects and commercial stuff. They don't offer compensation in their listing. Our title. So how's it up?
The question, what? If there's another question on that?
No, just in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the question we have is about modifications, right? Is the modifications able to do so when it comes to compensation? And we now haven't agreed upon between the seller. The answer is yes. And the form that you can use is the modification of terms, right? Indicating that if you have a buyer representation agreement, you can modify it, you know, on the compensation purposes if you're getting commission from the seller. So good point. And just like with anything, right? Everything can be modified, right? As long as you have mutual agreement between the buyer and the seller, right? Just as I stated earlier, right? Extension of escrow, price, and also commission. Well, let's go ahead and continue for the sake of time. Any other questions before we continue? And we just spent an hour just on one section.
Not even.
Yeah, so, you know, and there's still more documents. So just section C goes into the continuous right to compensate a broker identified as part of the prospecting buyer. So what that phrase means is no difference than what we currently have, right? Is that if the listing becomes an expired or canceled listing, you must provide, if you choose to provide, a seller with an exclusion list of anyone that has submitted, shown the property. And if that buyer comes back after it expires or cancels, the agent may be still entitled to a commission. Whatever amount you put there, 120, 90 days, whatever the case may be, you need to put there something. That's what that provision means. Okay.
And is that a specific form that we use to list the buyers, or is that just an email?
There is a separate form that you can use that identifies anyone that has submitted or seen the property, as long as you have their information, and then you provide this to the seller once you're canceling or the listing expires, and any one of those individuals buys the property after it cancels or expires, we are entitled to go after a commission. But it's within that time frame that you put. If it's 90 days after it cancels, expires, then 90 days is the window. If you put 4 months, 6 months, that's the time. Anything over that, then you're not entitled to a commission if that particular buyer ends up buying it. It may be a buyer that submitted an offer when you have the listing. Okay. Answer your question? Awesome. All right, so let's continue. C7, seller obligation to pay previous broker. Okay, so this is, again, if you are picking up a cancel or an expired listing, part of the segue and responsibility in the listing presentation is, Mr. Mrs. Seller, you know, I know that this was an expired listing. Therefore, is there any information that you want to share with me regarding the previous agent, right? The company, the agent's name, or a list of prospecting buyers that you may be responsible to pay a commission. Okay. And then the seller said, yeah, you know, here are the lists. So if these individuals buy the property, unfortunately, I'm not obligated to pay you as the current listing agent a commission. Make sense? Okay. All right. So now let's go to D. Optional seller concessions. Seller authorizes broker to put on the MOS. The seller is willing to consider offers asking for concessions with an amount up to percentage or a flat fee. So here it is, folks. This is the optional section that allows us now to coincide with the MOS to put in what that looks like. Commission-wise, concessions or its buyer's obligations. And that also includes commission from the buyer to you as the buyer agent. All right, the next section, which is E as in Edward, is pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to go into it too deep in it, but it's items included, items excluded, any lease, solar power systems, water softeners, liens, smart home features. Section F is in Frank, MLS and public marketing. Okay. 1 through number 5. Property will be marketed in the following MLS. Okay. That's your primary MLS. CRMLS. Okay. If you're part of CLAW, then it would be part of the MLS, right? If it's a commercial agreement, because even the commercial listing agreement, vacant land listing agreement, all of them have this new grid. So you need to emphasize where, if anything, you're going to be putting in any third-party websites, including the MLS. Coming soon status. Okay. Coming soon status. Seller does or does not authorize broker to market the property as a coming soon status, right? Pretty self-explanatory, right? Coming soon. Public marketing, section F is in Frank, number 3. To begin on the beginning date of agreement, or if seller instructs broker not to market the property to the public, okay? Then the form seller excludes the listing from marketing. Okay. Question.
Not sure if you answered this already, but should D5 match the amount, if any, listed in the commission section above?
D5.
Yes. The previous section, D5.
Let me see 1 second.
Question is, if any, should D5 match the amount, if any, listed in the commission section above?
So the answer is yes. Yes, it should match. A lot of information, folks. I'm hanging in there. All right, let's continue. So public marketing. To begin, obviously, if you're going to do any public marketing, F4 goes into placing the property listed on the MLS if it falls under the clear cooperation policy, right? Properties listed will be placed on the MLS within 1 business days of public marketing, and or it does not comply with the clear cooperation policy. Yes, question.
F3.
Mhm.
So if we're delayed, we sign this agreement today, we're not gonna market it until July 1st. And we just check the box and put July 1st in there, we don't need that sealed in.
That is correct. Yes, that is correct. All right, let's go into the broker and seller duties, which is G1, 2, and 3. Timing of presentation of offers. Seller instructs broker to present all offers received. So basically, this disclaimer is if the seller wants, as offers come in, to be presented to the seller, or the seller is instructing you to wait on all offers to a specific date. Okay. So here's the offers as they're coming, or let's wait till Friday, June 15th, as an example. We'll get all of the offers and then present them. Okay. Because now, full transparency, agents know, hey, did you receive my offer? Yes. When are you going to present the offer? Right. Well, now it's part of a disclaimer that says the seller has instructed that all offers not be reviewed by the seller till a specific date.
That's a matter of practice now, right? That we do.
Yeah.
You know, on Saturday and Sunday, we present when we're there. So, but now we have to get permission from the seller to do that.
That's correct. That is correct. All right, so buyer supplemental offer letters. Seller instructs us, right? These are the offer, and sometimes the sellers will receive letters from the specific buyer, right? You know, after seeing the property, my family fell in love. There's a photo of it. So that's currently, I believe, on the listing agreement currently. But it says that the seller instructs the broker to present buyer letters. If seller requests or relies on buyer letters, seller is acting against the broker's advice. Okay, because of everything that transpired, right? that they shouldn't be influenced by what we call love letters, but they're not considered love letters, but it's a representation of why this particular family wants this property. Make sense? Okay. Investigation, something that is currently with the current listing agreement. If the seller chooses to do any upfront investigations, such as the seller can get a natural hazard disclosure, better known as an NHD. They can get a termite inspection, general inspection. They can start the process of the homeowners association documentation before they even go live on the market. So this is a disclosure to the seller, hey, you have these additional options to do so before we go live on the market. Any questions regarding that? Okay. H1 goes into seller instructs broker not to take or use photography in marketing except as required by the MLS rules. Okay, very specific, right? So if the seller instructs us not to take or use photographs in marketing, except as required by the MLS, okay, it's an option. Question, Richard? No, okay. All right, H2 goes into the MLS instructions. Visitors are not restricted from taking photos of the property. Or if seller instructs broker to include on the MLS terms that only person preparing the appraisal or inspection reports may take photos of the property. These are for very sensitive sellers, or maybe they just have very expensive things that they don't want photos of. These are maybe your high-end clientele, right? That they don't want any photography done. So by giving this example, right, if the seller says, please do not allow, but only for purposes of an appraisal or for inspections, and you see a consumer doing this, you have the authorization to say, unfortunately, per the seller's instructions and discretion, we're not allowed to take any videos or photos of the property. That's what it means.
Will there be a place on the listing to indicate that? So that
Yeah.
when agents are, says no photos.
That's right. You can add it as part of additional terms.
Okay, so you're writing it in. It's not
That's
like a
correct.
check mark. Okay.
Yes. All right, exceptions to ownership or title. If there's any ownership or title that needs to be provided, then you add it on section I. J, seller intends to include a contingency to purchase a replacement property. So if that's the case, if you're in that scenario where it's subject to finding a replacement property concurrently closing, then you would use that form, which is pretty standard, but now it's added here on the new listing agreement. Owners opt out if they're opting out from having a lockbox or having a for sale sign. So that seller has the option, which is pretty standard right now with the current listing agreement. Okay. Any additional terms, then that would go under section L as in Lincoln. Advisory, pretty self-explanatory. Broker compensation advisory, which is now going to be, I believe, going to include as part of the listing agreement is full transparency when it comes to obligations of commission. Okay. Where before it was very limited, now it's going to be a segue of conversation to really explain the reason behind commissions. And it's an understanding between you as the listing agent and also the seller of how the commission structure is going to work. Okay. And then the segue of compensation to broker, right? As I mentioned earlier, all commissions are negotiable. They're not set or fixed by law. Okay. And then section 4A and B, section 1 and 2 go into the seller broker compensation. It says the following: seller agrees to pay a broker a compensation for services for representing the seller. The amount specified is in paragraph 2C5. Okay, if we go back to the grid of that section C1, C2, C3, 4, and 5, That's the amount of commission. Offer of compensation to the buyer's broker, right? Advisory. Compensation is negotiable and seller is not required to pay buyer broker compensation. It's there. It's there. Where the seller has the option to or the option not to pay a commission. Either through broker or direct, seller has been advised of the advantages and disadvantages of offering compensation to buyer brokers. See attached broker compensation advisory. And there it is, folks. When you look at the BCA form, it illustrates the importance of utilizing a buyer who has an agent in the commission. Okay. Authorization to offer compensation to buyer broker. If paragraph 2C is checked, broker is authorized to offer compensation to a buyer. Remember, there was C1 and there's C2. C2, if left blank, means that there is no compensation to the buyer's agent. But if it is checked, a percentage or a flat fee, then that ties the seller from paying a commission to anyone that brings a ready, willing, and able buyer license, a licensed agent, a commission of compensation. Seller is not required to authorize compensation to a buyer broker to list properties on the MLS. If any on offer of compensation is authorized, the offer will not be specified on the MLS. Once the MLS no longer offers cooperating broker compensation field or as otherwise prohibited. Broker will discuss with seller if there are circumstances where offering less than the amount authorized in paragraph 2C2 will be the best interest of seller. Should broker and buyer broker agree to a lower amount than that authorized, seller's obligation under paragraph 2C shall be reduced to the lower amount. Yeah. There's your answer, folks. So it's happening. There's no question whatsoever. Broker represents both the buyer and the seller. The amount specified in paragraph 2C shall be paid to broker and credit against any obligation that the buyer owes the broker. Compensation will be paid out of the transaction proceeds, right? And that's the due agent situation. Yes.
Great. So question, if you take a listing before June 25th, do you need to update the listing agreement with these new forms after June 25th, assuming you're not already in escrow?
So the answer is no, you use the current one. So if you get a listing now, before all these changes, then you still stay with the current agreement. Now, what's going to be interesting once they eliminate the commission on the MLS and how that's going to work. But the listing currently has where the compensation is already given to the buyer's agent, right? So that stands ground because that's an executed agreement that you have prior to all these new changes. Make sense?
Grandfathered in,
Say again?
it gets grandfathered in.
Pretty much, yeah, yeah. But anything moving forward with the new changes, then you must use the most current forms available to be in compliance. Do we need to take a break? Are we good?
Yeah, let's take 5 minutes.
Okay.
We do have food right over here, you guys. If you want to come grab some food, use the restroom, 5 minutes. I'm gonna put it up on the clock here.
Stretch.
Stretch for a second, grab food. Use the
We're taking a
restroom, be back
5-minute
here.
break,
5
guys, on
minutes.
Zoom.
5
minutes.
minutes.
Thank you.
Keep going, all right.
Start a timer for 5 minutes. Got water?
I got water.
I actually like how this makes it really clear. Yeah, a lot of the stuff is already on the one, but it really makes it clear. There's, I mean, there's a section where typically we would just write here, there's no valuation 5%. Fire agent comes, you're kind of supposed to give them 2.5%, and we write that there. And then now sellers are saying, oh, I didn't know that was an option. It's technically it is, but then now it just makes it clear you don't have to give it. That's what they're saying now. So it's just letting the seller know they have an option. I don't think it's yeah, nothing really that much different. The seller concessions are interesting because now the MLS rule is saying you can't list what the commission is. You can't list the commission that the buyer's agent is getting. You can list concessions. So if the seller's like, oh, but I'll give 2.5% to a buyer's agent as a concession, you can put that. That's gonna go the same. That's what I think. That's my opinion. You won't see the commission amount, but it'll say concession. Don't need to be this much. Yeah, just like this, those two. What ends up happening is like this, and they come out with another update. It gets updated constantly. Because all this stuff that's updated is that there's lawsuits. And then they're like, okay, then we have to change it. We have to change it. I think this is very sellers. It's good for the sellers, good for the buyers. Agents. This is from I was an agent.
Sure, you're gonna get a lot of call that cost.
I don't know, a lot of people are asking me, like, what are you doing? All this opportunity from this. I don't know how it's gonna affect you.
You can say like, yo, I don't know what's gonna happen. My answer is that I will not know what a seller pays and what a buyer pays. It's probably not gonna change. It's how you pay is gonna change. So what you, the month you pay is probably there's still sellers now that do that. That's still right now. That's the buyer's commission. We didn't have to sign it. I have buyers who get my buyer 2%. I signed it already. I could go back and say 8.5%. It's a $2.86 million. Oh, I'm fine with it. So I don't think that's gonna happen where you say, hey, I want the leftover money. Right? I had a deal a long time ago. Just before I was like, but the commission was 2%. That agent, it's a PW agent actually. 2.5%. That buyer ended up getting 5%. So then that agent was thinking about it. Didn't want the person and just try to send it to escrow and pay for you and add 25% on their closing costs for documentation. That's good, like, we gotta sign it, have it signed from the buyer, and has to see the closing costs. Agents like, can you not tell this commission? You know what I mean? They're like, but now it's like, you know, that can happen a little more honestly. But yeah, that trade was. I could have said seller to pay the remaining. And then there was 3 other offers. You know. Yeah, I could have tried to get the seller. So I was in a multiple offer situation. I don't wanna, you know, shoot myself in the foot. I wouldn't worry too much about it because I still think a lot of sellers see the value. Agents. I always put 2%. And a lot of people look traditionally most. But right now, if you've been getting the offer 2.5%, you get the extra. You know, but now they're maxing it out. What you get, so that happens, it's gonna change. Here's a modification of terms.
Yeah, but you see like every office got a different.
Or buyers said, right now, 2%. And I let them, they're compensating 2.5%. So we're just changing that to 2.5%. Match the offer, match the list. Yeah. Just a one page. It's called modification of terms.
Oh, great.
But.
A lot of transactions. That's good.
That's good. That's good. But I have, get some cancellations too, so that's not good. I mean, it's okay. Cancellations is part of it. What I think just practicing and learning the forms You explain it well. They get stuck with not, this not, the sign, get a sign. I wanna get, I should get food. Yeah, I'm gonna grab some.
All right, now it's ready.
We're gonna rapid fire now.
Have your comments in.
Ellie,
Yeah.
are we having the affiliate come and talk?
She'll be there. That's
Okay.
okay. Thank you. Rogers, please come and sit down. We're gonna start with your-
We'll do it. Okay.
All right.
All right,
so I
everyone.
just get started?
Yeah.
Yep, let's get
We're gonna go ahead and get started. So please take your time, enjoy lunch. The whole entire training is being recorded as well. Manny was gracious enough to put the mic on me, so now hopefully we can share, you can hear me now.
What?
So we're just gonna, we're gonna go ahead and continue, okay? All right, so hope everyone on Zoom is good to go. So as we continue with the listening agreement, now we're going to the meat and potato of the listening agreement. Remember what I said earlier, rapid fire, okay? Most of the stuff is part of the grid. A lot of the information is already part of the listening agreement, okay? Okay, so now we're going to go into the compensation part of the listing agreement. Total compensation, which is basically what was on the grid, right? Of C1 through C7. Compensation terms, pretty self-explanatory. What I really wanted to dive deep is section 5. Section 5. It says seller concessions. Seller concessions. Seller concessions are monetary payments that a seller agrees to contribute towards a buyer's expense and other costs to buyer is responsible for the transaction. What are some of the buyer's responsibility? Closing costs, okay, if they're buying down the rate, right? And also they may need concessions or even a down payment, maybe a percentage of for a down payment. Concessions may include, but not limited to, the cost of escrow or title, lender fee, repairs, inspections, and broker compensation. Okay. Concessions identified on the MLS listing must not specify that concessions are to be used for broker compensation.
That's okay. Keep talking.
Okay.
Say it again.
So let me repeat this because it says under section 5, seller concessions, and it says that the concessions can be used for broker compensations, but it says concessions identified in the MLS listing must not specify that concessions are used to be Used for broker compensation. Concessions must be allowed to be used for any permissible expense or cost. Okay. That is now part of the language on the listing agreement. Items included and excluded, lease or not own items. And then the multiple listing under section 7, multiple listing service. Obviously, the importance of why we use the MLS. Section 8 is the benefit of using the MLS and obviously the impact and opting out of the MLS, which is currently what we have on the listing agreement.
There's no red in there. That's great.
Yeah, there is
You
no
know,
red. Yes. Yes,
So
Stefan.
back to the concession part.
Yes.
The seller can offer an amount that could be equal to concession or to a compensation to the broker. They just can't state that it's for compensation. to the
That is correct. Yes. That's the misconception and the clarity that we need. It cannot be put as that on the MLS. Okay.
concession.
Section 10 is the MLS data. Really not much changes to this. Presenting an offer, they added the additional certain buyers may not be able or allowed to pay compensations to a buyer broker. These buyers may request for seller to pay buyer broker through a term or a concession requested in the purchase agreement. Okay. Or through a separate compensation agreement if seller has not authorized broker in this agreement to pay the full amount buyer owes buyer broker or any amount. Seller is advised to discuss and consider this best strategies for seller related to the presenting of offers. Okay, so it's very clear and concise in how you're navigating this approach, folks. Okay, not much changes to the rest of the form here.
Sorry, Simon, I can't hear you at all. I'm sorry. I can't hear you at all.
You can't?
Background
Okay.
noise.
The mic is not working?
No, you guys, the mic's not working. Simon's speaking as loud as he can. Simon, if you can just speak up, we're doing our best to make
Okay.
this happen and everyone will just keep the noise down to a minute.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so showing of properties. Seller acknowledges, this is a new added provision on the listing agreement that seller acknowledges that the real estate broker must have a representation agreement with a buyer before showing property to the buyer. Seller consents to broker entering into a buyer broker compensation agreement with the buyer. And that by doing so, the brokerage company will become and considered a dual agent representing both the buyer and the seller, which already stresses and emphasizes already on the grid in subsection C3, right, of the dual agency agreement. Stefan?
I thought I heard something that was kind of alarming, but I wasn't sure. Would you mind just repeating that section?
Absolutely. Showing properties. Seller acknowledges that real estate brokers must have a representation agreement with a buyer before showing properties to the buyer. Seller consents to broker entering into a buyer representation and broker compensation agreement with a buyer. And that by doing so, the brokerage company will become a dual agent representing the buyer and seller. Basically, it's a disclaimer, folks, that in the past has not been very clear and concise in how dual agency agreements work, right? The state of California still allows dual agency. A lot of states do not allow dual agency anymore. We're one of the few states that still allows, and that can change. We're not going to see dual agency because how do we really have each party's best interests, right? Especially if there's a conflict. It's all grand and dandy when there's no issues, right? The process goes as very smooth as possible, but it's when there's a problem and an issue, then how do you have everyone's best interest? You've got to be very delicate, and it's like being on a tight rope, right? Trying to navigate the buyer and the seller scenario. Question? What?
So that's an interesting section there, that the seller is saying that he knows that the only people entering the deal property is going to have a buyer agreement. So that means, for instance, Zillow already threw it out there that they were going to show properties. They would be willing to show up to 5 or 10 properties without a buyer agreement, and the person wanted to look at an offer, then they would enter into a buyer agreement. So
But this is now. All companies, all real estate brokerages are going to have to be uniform when it comes to these new rules and regulations.
this was just a couple of weeks ago after the NAR agreement that Zillow said they wanted to do. This is their workaround buyer agreement. So it's interesting that that's written into that. So
Yeah.
it addresses that, and it also addresses if the buyer says, "I don't want to sign an agreement with you. Can we just look at a few houses?" You're able to say, "Unfortunately, no."
Yeah, it's a very interesting paragraph that really clears and states the fact, right? Stefan, you had a question?
No, I was just gonna say, I think the challenge with dual agency in California is that we have large brokerages. So the agent for the listing is Keller Williams Coastal Property. And if Alice has a listing, I, as a fellow agent of Keller Williams Coastal Property, writing an offer on her listing, that's dual agency.
Yeah. Remember, dual agencies, one agent representing both buyer and seller, two agents in the same brokerage representing buyer and seller. That's considered dual agency. Richard, yes, sir.
This showing properties, that just pertains to the listing agent, right?
That's my interpretation, that it is strictly seller and the listing agent. Yes, sir. All right, the next paragraph 21 through 25 is pretty self-explanatory. It's part of the original listing agreement. Attorney fees, management approval, pretty self-explanatory. There's really no big changes to that. They've added some language on section 26, A and B. If property is sold under the jurisdiction of probate court, seller has an executor or administrator, you know, they must be unnamed, and that's the section that you're going to put the case number and all that fun stuff. More than one agent, that's added to the listing agreement that you would utilize the AAA form. Okay. All right, that concludes the listing agreement.
All right.
It only took an hour and a lot of fun stuff. Well, I think that was really the biggest hot topic right now because there's a lot of changes to the listing agreement, right? So I understand, and we really dove deep into, you know, the unknown, right? Yes,
Right.
Kelly.
So just to confirm, can a seller/listing agent decline to work with an unrepresented buyer or refuse to offer concessions to any unrepresented buyer on the MLS?
I believe you can. Yes. Yes. Okay, so the purchase agreement, which coincides, right? We need a listing agreement to service a client. We need a buyer purchase agreement to represent a buyer, right, and navigate the process. So surprisingly, the purchase agreement, and that goes for residential purchase agreement, vacant land, commercial, the residential income purchase agreement, there's really not many changes to it. Okay, not many changes to it. So I'm not going to go too deep into this, but they did add section L for insurance. Okay. And that is a contingency insurance. A lot of insurance companies are leaving the state of California, folks. So it's vital and important if you represent a buyer that they're on it, just like inspections, right? We've got to get those inspections done so we know exactly the condition of the property. So we know how to navigate if we're going to do a request of repairs. With that also is the insurance provision, right? Because now there's been delays and sometimes deals fall out because the buyer cannot get homeowners insurance. So now it is now a condition of the provision that is a contingency of 17 days to make sure that the buyer releases that as part of the segue to continue with the process. Dino, you had a question, sir?
That apply for cash offers?
That includes cash offers, yeah. Gazette. Cash offers, homes need insurance.
But they may still want insurance, and if they can't get it, they don't want to buy the
But
house.
what if, let me put a perspective here. What if, they want insurance, even on a cash offer to protect the position of the seller if the house goes up in flames?
The seller's not viable. I understand the importance of having insurance, but if the buyer, this is for the buyer, right?
This is for the buyer, correct?
Yeah.
Well, you need to put that as part of the process. Because under the interpretation, if a seller is selling a property to a cash offer, you know, there's conditions that need to be released, right? Which is usually physical inspections, okay? On a cash offer, you don't even need to do an appraisal, right? Because it's a cash offer. So if they leave this as part of a condition, that's their way out of a contract, even though it's a cash offer. So they need to release that as part of the process. So I understand that, you know, hey, this is no lender requirement. I'm buying it with a cash. We as the buyer still need to lift that as part of the process, because that could be their out on this particular condition, because that's what the contract says. Does that make sense? Yeah.
That the buyer has the responsibility to secure insurance 17 days after acceptance. Because right now, this is just an agreement. You haven't even found the property.
That is correct. That's after an executed acceptance.
Okay.
That starts the momentum of all these timelines to release certain conditions. Okay, no difference in physical, seller disclosures, HOAs, appraisal, loan contingency, and then the fun one of insurance. It's part of the segue here, folks.
I
It's the
think
fun.
that the insurance issue is a new one.
Correct.
And so the car update is just to highlight the fact that the buyer needs to bring extra attention to that issue when otherwise they didn't have to.
That is correct. Yes.
Now it's another condition.
Okay, common interest disclosures and review of lease or liens against the property, such as like solar panels, water softeners, stuff of that nature. Okay, not make changes to page 2. Optional wildfire disclosures. These are specific properties. How you find out if it falls under this is obviously your NHD reports, right? It'll say, yes, it is part of it, or no, it's not. Homes that are usually in the hillsides, mountain areas may have this as part of that requirement. So knowing, because that can also alter the insurance as well, right? If a particular buyer wants to get homeowners insurance, right? That may be one of the issues. Okay, nothing on the bottom of the HOL is self-explanatory. Property addendum and advisories, that's changes to this. Okay, and again, I'm just kind of rapid fire here. Addition of property or closing, obviously, everyone should know that all properties are sold in its as-is condition. Except as specified under paragraph 9C, seller is not responsible to repair any holes left after the removal of any wall hangings such as pictures and mirrors, brackets or nails. So it's just added language in there that the seller is not obligated to patch up all of these holes left by the seller. Okay. Okay, talks about insurance. Section B goes into insurance. This agreement is as specified under paragraph 3L, contingent upon buyer assessment of availability and approval of the cost for any insurance policy desired under this agreement, okay, under the agreement. And that goes back to your question, Dino, you know, if it's a cash offer, right? It still needs to be removed, because under the interpretation, that can be an out for a buyer if they want to exit, because they have that as a condition. So just FYI. Pretty self-explanatory, nothing big changes. This is what we currently have on the purchase agreement. Okay, nothing here. warranty. It's all part of the standard that we currently have on the RPA. All right, so section D talks about balconies. All right, there is a new form, and most sellers or HOAs have to comply with this. It's the balconing of exterior stairways and other elevated elements. For properties with any building containing 3 or more dwelling units with elevated balconies, meaning, condominiums, townhouses that have, or even apartment complex, if they have a balcony, then it's part of the process. There's a form that we must disclose to the buyer, and the seller may have to do an inspection this year prior to the new effective date, which is January 1st of 2025. Okay, so these are only if it's a wooden balcony. They have to comply to getting an inspection by a certified company that does inspections of balcony for the integrity purposes. And the reason all this came to be was there was an incident that happened up north where unfortunately a balcony collapsed, and there was a couple fatalities because of that. So, all right, not much changes to H through L. All right, so section 14A and B is about contingency removal. Buyer is advised not to remove contingency related to review of documents until after the documents have been delivered, right? Common sense, folks, right? If you don't have all of the documentations to make a thorough judgment to continue forward, do not release, right? Any of those contingencies, because once you release a contingency, what you're telling the listing agent and the seller, hey, I acknowledge and I understand what I'm signing off on, right? Especially with DocuSign, again, rapid fire, they just click, 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 click without really reading it. I had a scenario at the office where the buyer, who is the owner now, believed she bought a 4-bedroom home. And now when she was doing approvals to use it as a housing facility, she went to get the approvals, and the city says it's not considered a 4-bedroom, it's considered a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. And the buyer felt compelled, like, I thought I bought a 4-bedroom house. So when that was brought to my attention, I investigated, I checked on the MLS. The agent did put 4 bedrooms, but an agent remarks, she did emphasize that one of the bedrooms, the 4th one, was converted from a den to a bedroom with a closet, and they just put a wall. On the seller's disclosures, the seller and the agent disclosed that originally it was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. So when I addressed that to the buyer says, well, that was never explained to me, but you signed off on this agreement. And that can happen, folks, especially with DocuSign. So be diligent in your approach. Okay. Not much changes to seller rights to cancel. Notice the buyer to perform. However, if the notice for multiple items, the notice shall be valid on all contingencies and contractual actions, which the delivery of notice is within the time specified in the agreement. Basically, everyone should understand the elements of how notice to perform works, right? Either party, the buyer or the seller, can send each other a notice to perform. Now, most savvy agents understand the proactive engagement that you can send a notice to perform 2 days prior to that condition being lifted. So that way, on the 17th day, the buyer has the right to release that, ask for an extension of time, or back out of the deal. Most agents wait till the 17th day to send out the notice to perform if the buyer hasn't released that as a condition. Now that gives the buyer an additional 2 more days to perform, right? From 17 to now 19 days, right? So it depends on how you navigate this from a listing aspect and also from a buyer's perspective as well, because you can also put a notice to the buyer to perform, right? do you all know what buyer can do to have the seller perform? What are some of the conditions? Replacement of property, right? Seller originally asked that it's subject to finding a replacement property and closing concurrently. That has a condition as well, folks, that they have 17 days to lift that as well. And if they don't, the buyer has the right to ask the seller to release that as a condition, or the buyer has the right to cancel those terms. Okay. Nothing really on page 11, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Obligation of buyer to pay compensation. Nothing here. Section D, 19D. Escrow holder shall provide to buyer and seller either a joint or separate closing statement or written documentation showing the amount of compensation paid. Buyer broker and seller broker. Again, going back to full transparency, right? Especially escrow officers, folks. Escrow officers need to be on top of their game now moving forward as well to understand the new agreements too, because it compromises also your escrow company and escrow officers too. So they need to be in alignment with all of these new rules and regulations as well. That changes to the assignment. Document or applicable links to a document shall be deemed to be in possession if located in the applicable party of authorization. Pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to dive into it too much. And then, obviously electric copies means like DocuSign and some of your third-party signature. Liquidated damage mediation is pretty standard still. Arbitration disputes, obviously there's 3 sections that both the buyer and the seller need to initial, right? Mediation, arbitration, and also any resolutions. Fair Appraisal Act notice, this has been added to the purchase agreement. Any appraisal of the property is required to be unbiased, objected and influenced by the proper or illegal consideration, including but not limited to any of the following, obviously race, color, religions. If a buyer or seller believes that the appraisal has been influenced by any of the factors, seller or buyer can report this information, and there is a website, the Bureau of Real Estate Appraisals. So that was added to the purchase agreement. Legal authorizations signer 3 days after acceptance has been added. And the last page just goes into section B. If property is sold under a probate, that was added similar to the listing agreement. The attached DEDA, if parties elect to have an alternative delivery method, that's a new form that was added as part of the new June 25th release. If you do have an offer presented, agent or the seller can initial. All right, any questions on the purchase agreement? Questions? Pretty self-explanatory.
Can you go back one page? One more? Because of, especially if it's the listing agent, well, both sides, that doesn't really matter, but because of the delivery, how we changed that by the definition, sometimes we get an offer that doesn't have all the information. So I don't know how crucial it is to have the buyer's agent office address or fax number, but for sure you want to have their name, DRE number, and email address. Because what changed about delivery, you probably spoke about that already, is you don't have to wait for the confirmation. Oh yeah, I received your email. Once you email that to them, to the accepted email, that's delivery. Okay, by the way, it can go both sides. So you have to be cautious as well. And aware.
All right, we're going to take a few seconds to have Brandy.
Sorry. Meaning, I just want to confirm, meaning if there's no email, if you leave that blank for whatever reason, then then you can't say, hey, I delivered it. That's why it's so important to. put that in there.
It's gonna be a loophole, because the other side say, well, I never gave you
Got
my right email address. You send it to KW email, but I use a Gmail, what
Yeah,
have you. So
okay.
this is a confirmation stamp that once you give that address, that's the one that you're committed to check,
Yeah.
spam, what have you. You cannot say, I never got it.
Do we have a fax machine?
The fax machine,
It's most reliable.
I hope not.
Next form, guys, round of applause, and we just want to hear a couple words from Randy.
My beauty pageant wave,
It's like this.
yes, okay. Clearly, you guys are learning some riveting stuff right now, and I do not want to take up too much time, but I hope you guys liked brunch, and I just want to say thank you for all of your support and make it a great day.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's go ahead and dive deep into now the buyer representation agreement. Meat and potato of what all this issue is. All right, here it is. Buyer representation agreement, non-exclusive. So the form is a non-exclusive agreement. Okay, non-exclusive. It doesn't say it's exclusive, it says non-exclusive, and it's on the top. So I want to be very clear in my approach, right? All of this is subject to change, all right? I know all of us are going to have a lot of questions. Bear with me, okay? I was surprised to see how many people had a lot of questions on the listing agreement, and I wish, again, going back, that I had the answers to all of it, right? Everything is still subject to change. All right, so part of the new buyer representation agreement, it says the maximum representation period allowed is 3 months from the date of this agreement. 3 months.
That's how fast.
Exactly, three months. Now, can this be modified, ladies and gentlemen?
Oh, yeah.
100%, yes. If that time you haven't been able to identify a property, you haven't been in escrow, or the deal falls out of escrow and now you only have a month left, can you extend the buyer representation agreement? Yes, you can extend it for an additional 3 months. Now, with that being said, if you still have 1 month, does that mean you have an additional 3 months? No, because you still have 1 month. So that means you extend it for another 2 months for a total of 3 months. Does that make sense? Yeah, I know. You got to use arithmetic now. You got to use a little bit of math, right? So what's 2 and 3? Yes, ma'am.
If you're extending, you use this form again?
No, you can add the modification of terms, extending the buyer representation agreement. So it coincides, because on the MT form, it says, because there's an MT form for buyer and an MT form for sellers. So make sure you use the MT for buyer, extending the buyer representation agreement, and you're gonna emphasize what the MT is being used for, right? Mirror it. Well, the MT is for the buyer representation agreement. The MT is used for the listing, or whatever the scenario in case may be. Okay. All right. Terms of representation. The items in this paragraph are contractual terms of this agreement. Reference paragraph provided. Further explanation in the form is 4 pages. Buyer is advised to read all 4 pages, right? You would think that the buyers would read all the darn documents, right? It's to their advantage and their benefit, right? But the essence and the reality is they don't. But it's important, because remember, now more so than ever, this is going to be a requirement, folks, for all of us to really hone our skill sets, understand the ins and outs, and know how to dive deep. Because if you get a very sophisticated buyer that literally dissects all this, how do you respond to that? I don't know. I don't know. It's not going to get you anywhere. Okay. So the more you read it, the more you're into, the more classes you take, the better informed in how to navigate this form in all forms. That's why you get paid the good bucks to do what you do, folks, right? And I still don't have the answers to a lot of the questions. Because if I don't, not even CAR knows, and there are attorneys that drafted these forms. I'm just letting you know, folks, the reality is, it's new for all of us. We didn't anticipate a year ago we would be in the litigations with NAR and all these settlements, right? But the reality, it happened. And now we had a pivot in how we now do business, right? And we're going to see more and more people, unfortunately, leave the industry. That's the reality. So educate yourself. All right, so the grid goes as follows. Section 8 is the representation period, right? Beginning date and expiration. All agreements expire at 11:59 p.m. Okay, so all day till 11:59 is when the expiration of this agreement, or upon completion of a resoluting transaction, whichever occurs, right? If you're in escrow and you close the deal, then obviously that is considered a concluded agreement. What type of representation, folks? This is where you have to understand the elements and how you navigate this when sitting down with a buyer, right? This is where you really have to hone your skills and understand your value proposition. Because most of us have been practicing real estate without a buyer representation agreement right now, right? Now this is going to be the standard of how we do business moving forward. All these changes are going to happen June 25th, and everything will take in action, what, August 1st?
August 17th.
August 17th, thank you. Okay, so what type of representation do we have? Non-exclusive or an exclusive, which validates if it's only checked. So you want to check it if you are going to represent a buyer that is a non or an exclusive, right? And there's additional language in here on how to cancel these agreements too, because it can be mutually agreed. Buyer can cancel or you can cancel the buyer. Okay. But these forms are currently non-exclusive. You have to make it an exclusive agreement.
I wonder if we take the initial relationship in a non-exclusive manner, and then when we identify a property, we do a new agreement to an exclusive manner.
Good point. Very good point.
Is that, I know that we got some ethical heroes here.
Ethical gurus. Yeah.
It is.
Is that like dating? Is that a very non-exclusive at first until it gets serious?
Yeah. It's legal.
We went for the kiss a little too early.
A proposal, right? Here's your engagement. All right, section B goes into B1 through B6, and it says the following. Properties to be inquired. Broker includes any associated license working through broker on behalf of buyer, provides services for the type of properties in the location specified below. So again, full transparency. The more you add to it, the more secure is it that a buyer ends up going in a different direction, and you work your tail off how we can go after compensation. Okay. B1 goes into what specific type of property, right? Is it multifamily? Is it 2 to 4 units? Or is it 5 or more units? Is it industrial, vacant land, commercial, tenancy in common, single family residence is excluded from this agreement, but it already emphasizes that you don't have to check it off, that is already a single family residence, including condominiums and manufactured home, SFRs. Okay, so there's nothing you have to do, but if it is a very specific type of property and you're using this form for that sake, you need to emphasize what it is. B2 goes into locations, county and city, right? Pretty self-explanatory, right? The more information, because there's going to be loopholes, right? A savvy buyer will know how to maneuver this to avoid paying the commission. So cover all bases, folks, at the end of the day, right? If the buyer wants a property in the Long Beach area, I would emphasize just cover all of Los Angeles County, right? Just cover all of LA County, because what if the buyer doesn't buy in Long Beach and buys outside of Long Beach, right? That's a loophole that now you may not be entitled to a commission. Okay. Additional descriptions, if there is a very specific, then you can add additional language. B4 goes into the following specified properties, right? Any specific properties, maybe an off market, or maybe it's one particular property that this is only for this particular property that we're having this exclusive or non-exclusive agreement. B5 goes into the properties, identify if there's an attached, maybe it's an in-house only transaction outside of KW. There's just in here that this specific section would be identified. Here's a list, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, of all the properties that fall under this category. Here it is. Buyers, B6, properties excluded from representation. Okay, these are for the situations where you may have a buyer that has multiple buyer representation agreements. Okay, or maybe they're in negotiations with another offer and it's pending, right? But you don't have an exclusive agreement with that specific property. And the buyer saying, look, I'm willing to put something in writing with you, but there's one property that I've already submitted an offer. If that happens, I'm not responsible to pay your commission. Full transparency, here is the property address, 123 ABC Street.
I think that's very real.
Yeah, 100%. Yep. Additional buyer preference and priorities. Okay, if it is, see attached buyer preference and priorities, then you would use BIP. Again, a full disclaimer, again, similar to the listing agreement, that broker compensations, the amount of rate of real estate commission is not fixed. Now we go into the meats and potatoes of the compensation. Just remove this. Amount of compensation. Percentage of the acquisition price or a flat fee. Pursuant to the compensation schedule attached with incorporate herein. So this is where you're going to put in the amount of compensation that you are willing to take when representing a buyer, which is a percentage or a flat fee. Make sense? Payments from a third party. Question?
Has and in there and it's not an optional.
So percentage of the acquisition price and
Put zero.
so
Yeah, it is.
it is if it's a percentage and if there's any additional amount that you're requesting. Percentage, and so let's say it's a 1% percentage plus an additional $500 for TC fee. Okay, so you get your 1%, but maybe you're paying a transaction coordinator $500, then it's and including an additional $500. Make sense? Payment from a third party. All right, so D2 goes into shall be credit against buyer's obligation to pay broker. Broker shall not receive any amount in excess of paragraphs 2D. Or excuse me, 2D1, unless the amount is modified. And that goes back to the modification of terms, right? We were talking about it earlier, right? Everything is subject to be modified. Nothing is set in stone as long as you have the agreement between both parties. All make sense? Richard?
That brings a point. So when you check the box on your RPA that they're going to pay for our compensation, the buyer's compensation, which means you have to attach this form to the RPA, which means the selling agent's going to see you requested 2% when he was given 3%. So he can just automatically lower his commission in concession to accommodate what your agreement says. Does that make sense?
It does. So again, going back to full transparency, yeah. You know, the,
Unless we reached out to them and asked, them to send them a text saying, "Check this out, state."
and
Yeah, but
that's,
then you have to go back and change the representation.
But the people are just signing the offer.
and this is where the CBC form, which the CBC form has been completely revamped. It doesn't have anything to do with the MLS anymore. It's a one pager that just concise to what an agreement between you and the buyer, you and seller, whatever the agreed condition is the new CBC form. Okay,
I would say in that circumstance, if you know that to really present that with your offer as a strength to your offer. So you know how sometimes you'll say, we will be asking you to provide a home warranty, so that gives you so you present that as a strength to your offer. We understand that you're paying 3%, however, this offer will only require 2%.
And then make the adjustment in the offer price.
And then you make it, and that way you call it out. If your offer is a little bit lower than another person, you're pointing out, you're only paying us 2, you're paying.
Yeah, but also, and has been a domestic
these are very good questions, folks. Very good questions. There, remember, now we're gonna have to do a little bit more work. All right, because everyone wants to protect their commissions, right? And how do we secure what the seller is willing to pay us, right? You want to have it in writing. So that way, if it goes sideways and now we're disputing about commission, well, we have it in black and white. This is what we agreed upon in the original process.
And Richard, that's why I think the idea of having an agreement to start working with the buyer and then an agreement that actually reflects the property you're writing on is probably a process that works, right? Because you need a general agreement to show them property, but then you need an agreement specific to that property and the compensation that's being offered.
There's an additional form, an SPP or something like that, at the end of that form. Because I just wrote up using that form on an off-market property. In that form, it goes through all of these. Seller was going to pay this, buyer agreed to only pay this, and then it has a section in there that says the difference will go to agent or buyer.
That's right. Yeah. So all that is part of the negotiation, folks. Because in the past, we were under the assumption that the commission, extra commission would go to us, right? Well, that's not the case. Now it has to be agreed upon where that extra commission is going. Because now we have a buyer who's obligated to pay us a percentage or a flat fee, right? If you choose to, you don't have to. But it also compromises our position when it comes to negotiation and getting our offer accepted if the seller is paying a commission to the buyer or not. Okay, so good points, folks. All right, where did I leave off? All right, so section D3 goes into similar to the listing agreement. It continued right to payment for broker involvement properties. Let's just say that the buyer is working with multiple agents. They may put a provision in there saying, hey, you know, if we do decide to cancel our agreement, right, or it expires, and that buyer now goes back and buys the property that you submitted an offer, or you showed the property and they end up buying it from another agent, you may be entitled to compensation from that buyer. That's what that disclaimer says. Cancellation of notice, section E. Non-exclusive effective upon receipt, days after, or if you have an exclusive effective 30 days after receipt. So if you have a non-exclusive, you can put a specific days after. If you have an exclusive agreement, it must give you 30-day notice, minimum 30-day notice. Okay. Section F is in Frank, buyer financial personal information, form BFPI, within 5 calendar days from executing of this agreement. There's 2 sections. One, buyer intends to purchase using a VA loan. Rules prohibit a buyer from paying a broker and other fees. Or buyer does not have sufficient funds to pay a broker. The reality is that may be the case. So what if that's the scenario? Okay,
Does that mean that the VA no-no goes away?
no, I don't think so.
No, right now they've decided to.
Allow.
continue doing what they're
Right.
Yeah,
doing. Yeah.
it's allowed. Thank you, Richard, for pointing that out, 100%. Okay. So again, if you're in that position and the buyer doesn't have how do you verify that scenario? How do we know that the buyer doesn't have the funds, right? Do we take their word? Or do we ask for proof? Right?
Well, they give us their proof of funds anyway.
Well, that's where I was going.
They give it funds just to facilitate the deal.
Yeah.
If they need to show it's 30,000 for down payment and 100,000 for vice versa, they just show that. They don't show everything.
But if you have 100,000 in the bank, you can't separate it, so you give me something for 100,000 in the bank. I've seen it before, pay my own.
Very, very interesting topic and position, right?
But, so I have a question about one thing.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's gonna be fine.
Yes.
If we, when you go back to, the buyer, if the buyer, you did the example of the buyer, I show them a house and then they go back and buy the house with another agent. Then we are, we should be entitled to some compensation. The only problem is, I think we all know that there's no way you're gonna get any money from the buyer regardless, unless you take it to court. No, you're not gonna take a client. So the next thing is, does this obligate the selling agent to any compensation to us because he didn't properly determine whether or not we had buyers?
Very good question. The answer is no. This agreement is between you and the buyer, has nothing to do with the seller. So unfortunately, we cannot go after compensation on the seller. The only avenue is going after the buyer. And that's going through the channels and investigations to determine, if they bought the property. And, we definitely could get risk management involved to send us a letter of demand for compensation based on the breach of the buyer representation agreement. But it's a coin toss, you may have to cut your what's the word? Cut your losses.
Yeah.
That
Be a killjoy, you're not gonna get
I guess
it's one of those far and few folks.
The realtors lost the lawsuit, now they're suing buyers for the.
Yeah.
That's the headline.
Let's put a lien on the house. A lien on the house.
Richard Sperling sued me.
Don't be suing each other here in the office, guys. I'll be the referee to that one, and I don't want to be the ref. As it is, we have sometimes real estate transactions among other offices. I run the Torrance office, and I have some agents that have transactions like, oh no. I have to be in the middle of this, so, yeah. All right, let's continue for the sake. I only got 30 more minutes of this, so I'm trying to just finish up with the documents here. Other terms, obviously, and then advisory compensation, which is similar. It's not fixed. It's all negotiable. All right, so here's really kind of the meat and potato of a broker right of compensation. I'm not going to go too deep into it. My thought is, please, you have a copy of the red line. I stress the fact, read this information. And you all have access to car legal as well, right? And ask specific paragraph, what does this mean? And let attorneys answer that question too. This is my interpretation, right? But sometimes I have to resource and go to car legal and ask, hey, I'm in a situation where I have this scenario. How does this work, right? And then I get their perspectives, but sometimes their perspective may not be the right answer. So it's kind of navigating a ship, right? It can go one way or another. I know the trajectory is to go straight, but with the waves, right? And I've used the emphasis this morning about a wrinkled shirt, right? Right now, everything is wrinkled, and how we need to iron it out as we go through the trenches of all these new documents, and how best practice involving all of these forms with buyers and sellers. So for a non-represented broker involvement, compensation is payable only if there was a broker involvement with the property. What does that mean? It means if you had something to do with that specific property, you were involved in that particular transaction or showing of the property, right? That's broker involvement. Buyer physically entered and was shown the property by the broker, meaning the brokerage, which you are licensed under the brokerage. Broker involvement means of the following: buyer physically entered, right? Broker showed the property. Broker submitted to seller a signed written offer from a buyer to inquire, lease, or exchange or obtain an option on the property. Broker performed a market analysis related to the property or reviewed property specific documents or disclosures with the buyer. So it's very, very specific in how these involvements can earn you a commission from the buy side. Make sense? Broker performed, the property was introduced to the buyer by broker or one for which broker acted on behalf of the buyer. Merely sending buyer a list of properties shall not be deemed broker involvement. So if you email a listing to a buyer, that does not necessarily mean it's a broker involvement.
But if you email them a listing with the CMA attached to it,
That is considered involvement.
that's involved.
Yeah, it's how you interpret this, folks, okay? So it's interesting. List of property shall be deemed broker involvement without document action on the property or broker analyzing the property for buyer specifically, or assist buyer in the potential acquisition of the property, or communications with seller or seller's agent regarding buyer potential of acquisition of the property. And it goes into the exclusive representation, and exclusive only if it's checked under paragraph 2A. Buyer includes any person or entity. What's an entity?
LLC,
A corporation, LLC, S Corp, C Corp, or even a trust, okay, would be considered an entity. Buyer or who in any manner acts on buyer's behalf to acquire property, right? Continued right of compensation for broker involvement on properties. Broker shall be entitled to compensation provided under paragraph 2D, which is the time right after an expiration of this agreement. If you provide the buyer with, hey, here's all of the properties we submitted, here's all the properties I showed you, here's all of the emails with attachments regarding specific to these properties. And if you come back and buy any of those properties that I was involved in, then you're responsible to pay me a commission. Make sense? Time of compensation. Upon completion of any resulting transaction through escrow, okay? Broker shall, so if a buyer goes into escrow, but it falls out of escrow, are we entitled to a commission? Even though we don't represent the buyer anymore? The answer is no. It hasn't closed. We're under the assumption that, you know, it's going to close, and you need to pay close attention. If this is a buyer that went in a different direction, and you put time, effort, and energy with this buyer, then you want to keep that very close and be prepared, ready to submit written complaint against that buyer for compensation. Okay. Because buyers, unfortunately, did go out and find other agents to submit offers. Yes.
Are you saying that I'm gonna have to go find an attorney and start my own lawsuit, or is there a quick way to do this?
We have risk management, and the good thing risk management provides as member services that allows us to go after compensation. So they'll help draft a letter on your behalf to submit to any potential breach buyer in effort to collect a commission.
the buyers see the house in open house, it's still. The house, they see in the open house, but
If a buyer's,
see the house in open house.
And you're the one
Not with
hosting
their
it,
agent.
Rose?
Not with agent, just, but they have signed this contract, but they see the house in open. But,
so what's the question to that? Are,
still they have to pay commission to.
not
agent.
if they're seeing the property. Remember, what has to happen in order to earn a commission?
They send the offer.
You must submit an offer. You must get the offer accepted. You must open escrow and you must close escrow. And then the buyer has the acquisition of the property, right? That's a full circle of an agreed close of a transaction. That's when you can go after the buyer for commissions. Okay, just because they see a property doesn't mean they're going to buy the property. It still doesn't entitle us to a
No, I mean,
commission.
they see the house, in the open house, but they ask the agent, send the offer, do everything.
Well, and again, going back, that's why you got to protect yourself. And the umbrella of these buyer agreements is the whole purpose is to really secure your position as a buyer's agent, right? Navigating. What if that buyer does go with another agent and submits an offer, right? Now we have what's called a procuring cost claim against that if they breach our agreement. But it only becomes a breach until actual buyer has initiated the process of buying, negotiating, opening escrow, and then closing. And that's where the real breach starts, right? Now, we may be in the conclusion, right? Well, they already went with another agent, right? Well, who's responsible for that? Can we go after the agent? Or do we go after the buyer, right? Well, there's sometimes ways in how we navigate the conversation. It says, hey, I got wind that you're working with another agent. But by that time, sometimes the buyers go radio silence on you, right? They're not communicating with you any longer, right? So it's very, very hard. And this is why, you know, in the beginning stages when you're having the consultation with the buyer, I think setting the tone and the standard right off the bat, and this is what I do, and this could happen, will eliminate any potential issues where the buyer may go in a different direction with another buyer. But again, you know, they're not children, right? They should understand the practical perspective of why they're signing these agreements, and we have to hold them accountable because buyers are liars, unfortunately, and they go different directions. You know, this is why we have these agreements, because in the past and currently, a lot of us don't use buyer representation agreement, folks. And the reality, they say, well, Simon, they went and bought a property with another agent. Do I have a case? Well, the first thing I ask, do you have a buyer rep? No. Then, you know, it's going to be hard for me to really help you collect a commission. You don't have anything in writing. And the first thing the buyer's gonna say is, I never had anything agreed with you as or your agent. And that's their loophole. This is going to secure, no difference than going on a listing appointment when you go and sell a property without a listing agreement. Of course not, right? Because you're not going to get a commission. Yes.
I have a deeper question. How's this buyer agreement going to protect us from other agents? Because I've had buyer agreements and another agent took a client. She just told the person to cancel the lead. Person called me, said, I got another agent. She said, cancel with you. And she's a listing agent. I'll go with her. That's the only protection we have with the buyer agreement. We have nothing there except going to the ethics committee maybe, and they'll probably do nothing.
Very good question. And the thing is,
Except Rob. Other ethics.
And the problem here, folks, is again, yes, Richard, to your point, right, is filing an ethics complaint against the agent. If we know that this individual agent steered your clients or influenced your client to use them, right? Because that's unethical, right? This is why we have ethics that pertain to how agents are supposed to behave with their peers, right? And it could go many directions, but ultimately, who's at fault? It usually is the buyer in this case, because they're the ones that agree to have an exclusive or non-exclusive agreement with you. Someone had a question, Cindy.
So, about that 30-day cancellation clause,
So isn't that, if it's an exclusive, then they would basically have to wait 30 days to transact?
Well, the 30-day provision is identifying and telling them, hey, you know what, I'm giving you a 30-day notice that moving forward, we're gonna cancel. Does that mean they have to wait 30 days? No. That means we're giving you at least a notice either to have a conversation with the buyer agent, right? And maybe as they lost connection somehow, and now that gives the buyer agent an opportunity to engage in the conversation. It's like, I apologize, I know I was in the sideway, but I appreciated it. What can I do to continue this relationship with you? Because no one wants to have a cancellation, not a seller nor a buyer, right? And that may give you the reinforcement to engage the conversation and continue with that buyer. Okay. All right. How much time do we have? We're almost done. So again, timing of compensation payment through escrow, accounting for payments to broker. If broker also represents the seller, obviously on the dual agency. Third party payment unless the buyer compensation obligation, and disclosure of anticipated payment to broker of others. So I'm not going to go deep into it, but I want to stress and emphasize that part of the disclosure of anticipated payment, there's the CBC form that is utilized for the ABCD form, right? Yes, ABCD. Okay. Cancellation of buyer representation agreement. Either buyer or broker may cancel this agreement by giving written notice to the other party within the time specified. What does written notice mean? Is a text message considered a written notice?
Yes.
How many say yes?
Yes.
How many say no? How many don't know? Okay, I believe that is considered a written notice. If the buyer says, hey, thank you, but I'm done, I want to terminate our agreement, that's some way of a written notice to an agent.
At that point, is there no reason to send a cancellation of contract?
I would still, for the sake of paper trail, reinforce it to cover your basis. If the buyer's being sneaky, get something in writing to protect you from this buyer buying a property that you showed or submitted an offer. Just go through the motions of it. Absolutely. Broker shall still be entitled to compensation if during the representation period or any specified in paragraph, so-and-so buyer acquires property for which there was broker involvement provided buyer delivers to buyer written list of those properties. Again, the segue, no difference in the listing agreement, guys. Please make sure that you provide a list because that's going to be the loophole. I'm not going to pay you, Stefan, a commission because you never provided me with a list. Yeah, in the back of my mind, I know you showed me this property, but part of the process in order to hold the buyer accountable is he needs to provide me with that list for documentation. You have to show proof, right? And well, it slipped my mind. I didn't provide that list. Is there a loophole through that? Well, maybe there is because you have emails that confirm that we saw the property, and that's your evidence if we have to go through an arbitration or mediation process, right? To collect and earn a commission. So a lot of stuff. All right, so financial and personal information. If either box is checked, obviously for buyer rights and offer to purchase, buyer authorized broker to include a term in buyer's offer seeking payment from the seller, right? And here it is, folks. As we go through the motions of all this, right, when submitting an offer, we're under the assumption that the listing agent and the seller are going to pay us a commission, right? That's the assumption, right? And what this provision states is that, that the buyer and you as the agent understand that we want to make sure that the seller is paying you a commission to offset the responsibility that the buyer has with you on the buyer rep and the commission that you and the buyer agreed. Okay. It also goes into the buyer's broker includes terms in the offer seeking payments, and then the form CBC. Buyer material use, any property for which buyer makes an offer or has already made an offer, that was added. Specific property for which buyer makes an offer, the property shall be deemed
It satisfies buyers' preference and priorities, notwithstanding language in the B, IPP one has been completed, is added to the buyer rep. Obviously, the management approval that the buyer rep has to be approved on behalf of the broker, or the manager does not approve it, then we have five days to not agree to the terms of what you and the buyer have, right? So it can be approved or not approved. Legal authorization, signer, pretty self-explanatory. Exclusive representation. So section 14A, B, and C goes into a caveat of the grid on the beginning page of the buyer representation agreement under 2A. Any initial by buyer here, the agreement shall be exclusive and revoked. Broker will devote time and resources to assist the buyer in finding and acquiring the property and the expectations of being paid by broker services. Buyer shall not enter into another representation agreement in conflict with this agreement. Now, remember, you have your exclusive and you have your non-exclusive. A non-exclusive stipulates that if someone else finds a property that the buyer negotiates and ultimately submits an offer, that may be the loophole that the buyer may not be responsible to pay you a commission. So be very crystal clear in how all that looks like, because it can go easily sideways if you don't tighten up these agreements. Section 16 goes into confirmation of compensation. Buyer confirms that the compensation specified broker services is a percentage at acquisition or price. Okay. And then the bottom section is just, again, going back to the trust and information. All right, not much changes to the end of that. All right, so this is the broker compensation advisory. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but it's pretty self-explanatory. It goes into when the seller lists the property. So this is a full disclosure that is going to be part of the agreement. If you remember on the listing agreement under addendums and advisory, it was already self-checked. This is what they're referring to, is this specific advisory. So the listing agreement compensation is negotiable when a seller enters into a listing agreement. Offering of compensation to a buyer, seller and seller's brokers are now required. So again, to be in alignment to the settlement of NAR, this is now full disclosure to the seller is Mr. and Mrs. Seller, here, this is what the compensation really entails, right? Again, I'm not going to go too deep into this. You have this for your reference, but it goes into really the understanding of how compensations work. Part 2, buyer broker compensation arrangements, which may limit the amount of buyer broker may pay to the amount in the agreements. Method for buyer broker is to obtain compensation, right? So again, it doesn't necessarily mean that the sellers will not have the option to pay, but they have the option to still pay a commission to a buyer. And it's to their advantage, in my opinion, that we need buyer agents and their buyers, because think about it, and I hear this quite often. This is what I hear. Well, why work with the buyer where I can work directly with the listing agent, right? Have you heard that? But the essence is you're the listing agent and you price a home well, you're going to get multiple offers, right? How is it going to be when you have all of these buyers thinking they can go directly to you and think they are benefiting? Because you can only represent one buyer, right? But then it goes back to the listing agreement, right? And how you identify and how that works. Because if you leave the dual agency blank and the seller says, look, I see that I'm not obligated to pay you a commission because we didn't agree to that, then the only commission you're going to get is the commission from the listing position. Make sense? Okay. It's crucial, folks. It's very, very important that you understand how all of these moving parts work, right? And all this, again, is still in the beginning stages. Okay. All this change as we go through the trenches.
Any questions on the broker compensation advisory, which will be attached to the listing agreement as part of the segue when doing this? So you don't have to think it's been already populated, like the agency agreement, just the possible representation agreement, the wire fraud and all the other fund disclosures. This is going to be attached to that as well. Any questions? Okay. What's going on here?
Good on the Zoom.
Any questions on Zoom? I think that's all of the, I think that's all the forms.
Is that it?
Yeah. We want more. We want more. I've been standing up here for 3 hours, but before we cut loose, folks, I want to stress and emphasize, the summary is a good resource. All right, a lot of your questions can be addressed in all of the forms that are going to either be modified or new forms are here with a little bit of a summary of what that means. Great resource to keep as arsenal for that purpose when you're thinking, okay, what is the listing agreement? What does the AVID say? What are the new changes affecting us? Here's the summary, scan it, download it on your computer, on your phone, and use this as a great resource. With that being said, any final questions before I cut you loose? And, you know, surprisingly, respectfully, we're giving you back 15 minutes of your time. And I thank you all. You guys have been amazing. A lot of hard questions. A lot of hard questions. You know, but again, we're all in it together. And as we go through it, we're going to continuously have more classes to really educate, because there's going to be things that, all right, that's new, that we didn't think about that. And it's just really providing that. We got amazing top agents in this office that, you know, also understand the elements, pick their brains. We're all here to help. Last question.
I just wanted to thank you for hearing us. Months ago, we requested that you do this tutorial.
Yes.
And then thank you to all the agents in the
Yeah.
office.
You're awesome. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Zoomies.
Because for 2 weeks, it's just kind of, and then after that, he has camps. So, trying to get into it. It's okay.